Okay, welcome back everybody for week 4 of the Joyful Parenting course. And this week I'm going to be talking about speaking from the heart. And this is really about interrupting some of our old patterns and ways of communicating, and interrupting them by seeing them more clearly, but also putting something else in its place, like having something to sort of insert instead of the old pattern to sort of unsettle things and change your thinking at the same time as changing the way you communicate. So I'll be giving you some specific ideas about how you can ask for what you want, and also, suggesting that this is just a process you can go through. You can use these ideas as part of a process of changing the way you communicate and the way you think about different situations, not as a sort of formula that I'm suggesting everybody adopts. It's just a bridge, if you like, to a more free-flowing way of communicating that's more free of the old patterns. So what are the old patterns I'm talking about? Well, I mean, from my own personal experience, I obviously draw on my own childhood and the patterns of communication that were formed and that I learnt in my own childhood. So specifically what I'm talking about are patterns where there's often blame or judgment placed on the child. So there's a problem, and the problem is basically, focused on the child. The child is the problem. The child is judged as being naughty or bad or misbehaving or, just being annoying or whatever the judgment might be. And there goes along a blame, that this is your fault or this is your problem, and it's a focus on trying to fix the child or correct the child or control the child. And so the language, you'd probably all be very familiar with it because it's just very, very commonly used, and it's probably been used in your life, in your childhood, and you probably use it yourself just unconsciously because that's the default sort of setting, if you like. We grow up with this default setting of judgment and blame and trying to fix whatever's out there. So in my case, I guess it was just so entrenched and so normal in my family when I was growing up that I never questioned it, and my response to my fear of being judged and blamed was to develop a pattern of internal self-judgment. So I would try to be good, to be the good girl, to try and avoid this judgment and blame and the anger or disapproval of my parents. So I was very scared of their anger and disapproval and of the punishment. So I sort of internalized that into, trying to be good, and this pattern of self-judgment that I have to sort of control myself or do things the right way and say the right things in order that I don't, get that stuff coming at me. So part of the problem with that pattern of self-judgment is that I found when I had my own children, apart from the fact that it's painful. It's really painful. So there's all this really uncomfortable emotion comes up when the self-judgment hits in. It hurts, you know. It's like you're beating yourself up internally. And also what happens is I found myself starting to project some of that onto my own children. So I started to notice the same sort of things being said. I was saying the same sort of things as had been said to me. And so even if I wasn't necessarily saying them, I was thinking them. I was thinking, you know, this is not acceptable. You know, you're not doing this right. You're lazy, or you're bad. You know, I never wanted to say you're bad, but, you know, I was thinking this is crazy, you know, or whatever. So, so there was definitely, it was sort of leaking out, even if I wasn't actually saying it all. You know, this irritation, annoyance, all these things were leaking out that I was actually projecting onto my children. So I really wanted to change the pattern of communication and to sort of interrupt that so it didn't get passed down to the next generation. I didn't want, you know, my children to be scared of me, or to be scared of my, you know, my judgment, or scared that I would blame them, or any of those things. So I really wanted to interrupt that pattern, but I needed to work out, well, what do you put in its place? You know, where do you go with this? So part of my solution, which I've already shared with you last week, was to use the work. So that really remains the most useful tool for me when I get these judgments of my children coming up, when I'm blaming them for something, or complaining about them, or seeing them as any sort of problem. Then I do the work. I write it down, and I use those questions of the work. So that is my sort of first port of call. But I found that there are other tools and other ways of communicating that can sort of support that, and also help to shift my thinking in different ways. So one of the other books and authors that I was very influenced by was a guy called Marshall Rosenberg, and he wrote a book about nonviolent communication. And I was very, very interested in nonviolent communication, and I went into it quite deeply, and it gave me a new perspective and some new ideas about how I could communicate. And so I sort of adapted it to something that suits me, because the way it's presented by him is very much a sort of formula of how you speak, and I've sort of simplified it and adapted it in a way that, you know, worked well for me. But also the other thing I got, and I'll share that with you, but the other thing I got out of his work was this idea that it's really important to own your problems. So rather than projecting them out there and blaming the child, to actually bring it home and sort of redefine it and see how it's actually your problem. So for example, the example I give in the book, which seems really relevant because it still comes up and lots of people talk about it. It's sort of like the example of what you do if there's a huge mess, you know, in your house. You know, you've got stuff all over the floor, you've got Lego everywhere, you've got food, you've got, you know, whatever, you know, a huge catastrophe is going on, you know, in your house. So the sort of default programming, the conditioned response that I had, and that you've probably also experienced, is to think, well, this is a problem and the children are the problem. Their messiness is a problem. Their unwillingness to pick up anything or clean up or do what I say, or, you know, or do chores or whatever variation it is. And then there's a tendency often for people to you know, judge their child as messy or lazy or disobedient or just, you know, uncooperative or whatever, you know, because they won't clean up, or they won't, or they made the mess in the first place, or whatever the story is. So that's the sort of conditioned response, which is to judge and blame the child. To actually see that when I'm looking at an incredible mess or a room that's got stuff all over it, I want it cleaned up. The person, like this, say for example, you know, one of my sons, they have their room and it's just a complete disaster area. And I go in there and I look at it and I think, oh my God, you know, this is a big mess. I could think of it in terms of, well, I would like this space to be clean, but they're not obviously wanting that space to be clean in the same way right now because it isn't. They haven't cleaned it up. So I want something and I don't feel like I'm getting it, therefore I've got a problem. You know, the fact that the room is a mess and I want it cleaned up and it hasn't been cleaned up is my problem. If they thought it was a problem, they probably would have already done it. Or if they're reminded, they would do it, or whatever. So my son is not seeing it as a problem. I'm the one that's got the problem because I want it different to how it actually is right now. So if I actually own this problem, you know, I have a problem with this room being messy, then what nonviolent communication, or I call it speaking from the heart, does is give me a way of communicating about my problem and basically asking for help. Okay, it's a way of firstly owning the problem and then asking your child for help with your problem. And just that way of reframing it really changes the dynamic. It's just a completely different sort of energy when you're asking for help rather than judging and blaming your child for creating this problem. So that's a big shift, like a huge shift, just right before you say anything, you know, that you've actually shifted the sort of thing around to it being asking for help with your problem. So basically the approach to take, now again I will say before I go into the specifics of this, is I would often stop and do the work at this point before I even said anything. You know, like if I've got a problem and I'm stressed out about a mess or a child not doing what I want or whatever it is, then I would often do the work on that right from the start. But if I don't have time for that, or it's just not relevant at the moment, or it doesn't happen or whatever, then I would go ahead and speak, you know, about whatever my problem is. So I've essentially put this nonviolent communication slightly differently to the way Marshall Rosenberg does, but essentially the starting point is to make an observation. So this is just an observation of what you are seeing without the judgment attached. So to take the example of the messy room, I could just say, when I see all these clothes and this food or whatever it is on the floor of your room. So it's just, I'm seeing, and describe exactly what you're seeing. So it's pure observation, no judgment. You know, when I see Lego all over the floor, or when I see your bowls, food, you know, spread all over the couch, or when I see you hitting your brother, or, you know, what else might you observe? You know, when I hear that you don't want to go on the outing that we've planned, or I see that you're not wanting to brush your teeth, or whatever it is. So you're basically just saying, okay, this is what I'm observing. And then the next step is to say how you're feeling about it. So when I see the clothes and the food all over the floor, I feel ... So I feel frustrated, or I feel upset, or I feel angry or sad, or, you know, whatever it is. Usually for me, it's frustrated. When I see that, I feel really frustrated. And then the next part is what I want. So it's an observation, a feeling, and then a statement of what I want. So when I see the clothes all over the floor, I feel really frustrated because I want to have more order in this house. I want to have a space in this house that I'm not worried about rats, you know, or cockroaches or whatever. I would just like more order. You know, it could be whatever it is. Or I don't want to worry about treading on Lego when I walk across the living room. Or I want to be able to sit on the couch without sitting in old food scraps, or whatever it is, you know, that you actually want in this situation. So you make an observation, you say how you're feeling, you say what you want, and then you make a specific request. So this is really important. You make a request, not a demand. You're asking for help, okay? This is the whole point. You've got a problem, you're asking for help. The more specific you can get in your request, the more likely they are to come along to the party. So when I see the clothes on the floor, I feel really frustrated because I'd like some more order in this house. Would you be willing to pick the clothes up and put them in the washing basket now? So that's my request. Or would you be willing to pick that Lego up off the floor? Would you be willing to help me do it? You know, I'm gonna offer to help, but would you be willing to come and help me clean up this space right now? Or would you be willing to come with me where we agreed to go? Or, you know, whatever it is. The point is to make it as specific as possible, and to make it a positive request that is something they can actually do, rather than a negative thing. So, you know, you're telling them to be quiet or stop complaining, or, I mean, be quiet is fine. Actually, that's a request I use quite often, come to think of it. But not stop doing what you're doing. It's better if it's a positive request, you know, can you please come and do X, Y, and Z? So that's the basic formula, if you like. And again, I stress that it's like a bridge. It's something to interrupt the old patterns. So it's something to practice, to think about, to sort of reframe how you're speaking as a bridge to just shifting that old programming. So I actually tried to use it quite a lot when I first learnt this process, and I followed that sort of formula as much as I could, and eventually it just sort of got incorporated into our lives, and I don't ever follow the formula now. Basically, what I do now is just make requests, or sometimes I'll say how I'm feeling about something, but it's the shift from the judgment and blame and you're the problem to asking for help and making requests rather than making demands. That's the main shift. So my focus now is really on just making the request. Sometimes, as I said, saying how I'm feeling about it. Now, there are a couple of things that I point out in the book about this, and there's actually one or two points that I'd like to draw your attention to. And one of them is about how we express our feelings, or how we talk about our feelings. And I've noticed that it's very common for people to, well, it's just a sort of weird thing in the English language, actually, that people sometimes say I feel, when they're not actually talking about their own feelings. So you can say, I feel, let me just get some of the examples I've got. Yeah, I feel misunderstood. It's actually talking about the other person's reaction. So when you say I feel misunderstood, when I say I feel misunderstood, I'm not actually talking about my feelings. I'm talking about the fact that you don't seem to have understood me, or my interpretation. So if I say I feel abandoned, I'm essentially saying I think you've abandoned me and I feel upset. Or if I say I feel abused, what I'm really saying is I think you've abused me and I feel upset. So the feeling I have is being upset or angry or sad or whatever. Feeling abused is not a feeling. It's actually pointing the finger at the other person and saying, you've abused me, you've betrayed me, you've bullied me. Like, I feel bullied is basically saying, you've bullied me. So there's a whole list in the book. This is on page 108 of these type of words that we use in this way very commonly in English, but it's really not helpful if we're saying this to our children, because it's basically pointing the finger at them and saying, you know, if I say, like, I feel unappreciated, you're basically saying you're not appreciating me, and it's a judgment. So rather than say those things, it's important to talk about our actual feelings. And I actually went to in the Nonviolent Communication book, where I referenced that in my book. There's a whole list, like pages of feelings. And because I had grown up in an environment where people didn't talk about their feelings, and, you know, they didn't have this form of communication, I basically had to go back to square one and learn how to talk about my feelings. So I actually had to reference this list and go, okay, well, what am I feeling? What can I say here about what I'm feeling? And to do that with my children was actually felt very vulnerable. And I think a lot of people find it very vulnerable to talk openly to our children about how we're feeling, because it wasn't done, you know, when I was a child, and it certainly would have been seen as a weakness. You know, parents don't ask for help, they just tell you what to do. That's how it works, you know. So they don't tell you they're feeling sad. I mean, they might tell you they're angry. That was it. That was common enough. I got that, but I didn't get anything beyond that. I didn't get, you know, I'm feeling sad or upset or hurt. Goodness, no, never. So it was a process of actually opening myself up and being willing to both feel my feelings and express my feelings openly to my children, be in tears, you know, and to tears of frustration or tears of overwhelm or tears of whatever it was. There was a lot of frustration and overwhelm. And to actually be honest about that, and to share that, how I was really feeling, and then to make a request. And that level of honesty really makes a difference. Even if your child doesn't go with your request, you know, even if they don't comply or they don't say yes, just that degree of honesty with myself was really healing, you know, to actually be clear about my own feelings and express them clearly was really, really helpful for me. So it's worth it just for that, to have that connection with your feelings and to express how you feel. So it's really helpful. And also I found it really helpful to actually think about what I wanted, and to think about the requests, and to think deeply about what I really wanted. So in the case of, you know, wanting a child to pick up stuff off their floor, or pick up the Lego, or tidy up the plates, or, you know, whatever, then that's fairly straightforward sort of requests. And they didn't need a lot of analysis really. But if there were things that I was getting really stressed about, and the requests weren't being met with a cooperation or a yes, so I was having to, you know, I had this problem that was ongoing and it wasn't being solved, then again, part of what I did was go back and do the work on that, and do the work on what I was wanting, what I was hoping to change, and also to think more about what I really wanted. So did I really want the house to be much tidier? You know, was that what I really wanted in this situation? Or would I actually just like a bit of help now and then? And am I actually fine to do most of the tidying up myself? So it actually invited a process for me of digging deeper into what I wanted, and when I was clear about what I wanted, to be able to be more assertive about it. And this is another part of this process that is very important, and what was very important to me was to be able to be clear and assertive about my requests. So matching sort of the energy of my child, and being able to sort of raise my voice or repeat the request, or, you know, I didn't really, these days I don't even really have to be nice about it all the time. It's a matter of sort of adapting to the situation you find yourself in and the child that you're communicating with. And now that I've, you know, unpacked a lot of stuff, I can find more assertiveness within myself. It's like if I was judging my child for being, you know, aggressive or too loud or too demanding, or, you know, whatever it was, the more I've actually questioned my judgments and seen that, okay, it's not really true that I believe that they shouldn't be demanding or they shouldn't be aggressive. It's actually allowed me to be more of myself. So to sort of lose some of the self-judgment and lose some of the good girl persona, which was actually holding me back from saying no to certain situations, to asking for help in a clear and assertive way. You know, I was really trying to be really nice for a long time, and it just wasn't really getting anywhere. So the less judgment I have of my children, the less judgment I have of myself, the more free I am in my communication, and the more assertive I am. And, you know, things sound quite different. There really is a very, very different energy in our house now. And I don't feel like a victim. I don't feel like a doormat, you know, that I'm being walked all over. And I'm also not, you know, projecting all this judgment around the place. So it looks really different, and we've sort of got in the flow of that now, which doesn't mean, you know, there aren't challenges. It doesn't mean things don't need to be sorted out, you know, and problems don't need to be solved. But we've got different ways of talking about it than we used to. And all the family have sort of taken that on board. And this is another element that you can also add to the next topic, which will come up with next week, which is creative problem solving. So when we get to creative problem solving, it's how you actually put all of this together to sort of into a process where you can actually involve your children as well, or your whole family, to sort out and find solutions to sort of ongoing issues that are causing problems in your house. So this speaking from the heart is a really important part of that, because everybody in the family needs to be able to say how they feel and what they want, and to make requests of each other. And that has to be modelled, you know, by somebody to start with. And so I guess I took that on. I took on the role of modelling that and speaking in this way in order just to shift those old patterns and to interrupt them and to put something else in its place until we sort of found our flow as a family. And of course the flow changes all the time as kids grow up. You know, then they change, the way they communicate changes, what they want changes, you know, it all changes. But the beauty of these tools is they can change with it. You know, it's a fundamental just way of speaking that you can continuously adapt to the changing needs of your family. So I'll just see if there's anything else that I wanted to add to that. Oh, the other element was when making requests was the tendency to, and this is part of being assertive that I had to learn, is to notice when I was giving up. So that's basically when you start rolling your eyes and going, oh my God, you know, whatever, you know, it's sort of like, if there's an energy of giving up, it's like you've resigned yourself to something, and you're still likely to feel resentment about it. So you wanted something, you haven't got it, and the energy of giving up is going, oh well, you know, I'll just feel really, you know, shitty about this, and I'll feel like a victim, and I'll be resentful, and I'll blame you anyway. So I definitely experienced that quite a lot, and that I found was a real trap, you know, to fall into. So I had to really notice that. And resentment is such a clear indicator to me now that I haven't been honest with myself. You know, have I given up on something that I really wanted? If I'm feeling resentful, yeah, the answer is probably yes. So either I need to be more assertive, or we need to go into this process of problem solving to find a solution that I'm happy with, as well as everybody else. as part of that, I can question my thinking around the issue as well. But making a shift to making requests of your children rather than making demands, it's not an invitation just to give up and become a doormat and end up being resentful. You know, it's something that certainly can happen, and I've experienced it, but I would encourage you to really watch out for that, because that energy of resentful sort of victim is yuck. It's really, really horrible, and your children will pick it up and you will pick it up, and it's just not a nice space to be in. So it doesn't have to be that way, but it's something to really watch out for. So I think that's about all that I really wanted to say about that at the moment. I'd certainly invite your questions about this topic, and also any questions you have about any of the material we've covered up to now, including doing how to use the work. So for next week, as I said, we will be looking at creative problem solving and how we can put all this together, all the stuff I've talked about so far, how we can put it into a process of finding solutions that everyone in the family can be happy with. So if you can read ahead to the chapter on creative problem solving, that would be awesome. Otherwise, just tune in next week and we'll talk about it then. So I'll just... Now I will also unmute everybody. Although you can remute if you want to, and just unmute if you want to talk. It's entirely up to you. So yeah, open for questions or comments or anything you'd like to share about how you're experiencing this course so far. So who would like to go first? Have a volunteer?
All right, I have a question about
okay,
what you just
awesome.
talked about. So when you do the whole, would you be willing to help me pick up the Lego or help me or put those clothes into the basket or whatever?
Yep.
And they go, no.
Yeah.
Which is when I would typically go into the eye rolling and the whole, oh yeah, well that'd be right.
Yeah, the eye roll, yes.
So what then? Is that when I go away and question my thinking about it?
Well, you could, like, as I said, sometimes I will just get more assertive about my request and more clear about how I'm feeling about this situation, more open about how I'm feeling and what I'm wanting in the situation. So sometimes it's a matter of communicating more openly about how I'm feeling and how this situation is affecting me. You know, the more open you can be about your feelings and what you're actually wanting, the more likely your child is to respond, because, you know, you're asking for help. You're not telling them what to do. So, yeah. But if, as is the case with me and possibly most of you, if you've actually had quite a lot of the old conditioning coming through you where you have been telling them what to do, you know, and you have been making demands, it might take a while for them to make an adjustment, you know.
Yeah.
Because their default setting might be, nah, sorry, can't help you, right?
True, I suppose, yes.
You're changing your sort of default setting, and it can take a while for theirs to change too.
Yeah, that makes
which
sense.
is why the more open you can be about how you're feeling, that is more than anything, that was what changed the way my children responded. It's like, oh my goodness, mum's actually really upset. Oh, okay, well, you know, maybe I can shift this or help. And putting the request in, rather than just, can you do this, like, I'll help you, you know, can we do it together? It's sort of like inviting some connection there, you know, that they're not on their own here, that it might be difficult. You understand it's not their priority, but you'd like, you know, some cooperation. So sort of meeting halfway, if you like, can be helpful. And yeah, those are, they're all things I've done, and I've also questioned my thinking a lot about what I'm actually asking for and the changes that I'm thinking should happen. And I've also gone into problem solving mode. So that's the main thing that I would recommend. If your requests are not being, if they're not responding or they're saying no, then it's often time to go into problem solving mode. So we'll get into that next week. So there's more tools, you know, you can add.
That's good. Because I have definitely one very messy bedroom. So I'm going to be trying this tool to see how we go with it.
Yeah, we'll see how you go. I mean, certainly in the case of the messy bedrooms, the result of problem solving in my home was that I just shut the door and left the messy bedroom as it was. and essentially waited for the internal motivation of the child, both of children, to kick in, so that until they actually wanted to have their bedroom look differently. So before that, I would go in, before that kicked in, and it has kicked in both cases. Before that kicked in, I would sort of go in, you know, in a hazmat suit once every 6 months or so. Sort of like, oh God. And I would just do this big clear out with their permission. I had to get their permission. And then eventually it changed and they started cleaning up, and was an internal motivation that arose. In fact, in my youngest son, the internal motivation came on so strongly that he's cleaner than anybody in this house. He's in there vacuuming his bedroom at 10 o'clock at night, you know, dusting his Lego and getting everything clean. And yeah, it almost sort of went the other way into a sort of OCD type thing for a while there. So yeah, it sort of came in really strongly with him. With my other son, he just does it in bursts. So his room can get absolutely gross, in my opinion, for a week or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. And then all of a sudden it'll get too much for him and he'll just have a day where he just spends, you know, hours just cleaning it all out.
Yeah.
But so they're different, you know, and they have different sort of expectations of order in their space. But yeah, up until the time they started wanting to have it clean themselves, I basically either just shut the door or did it myself with their often with their help and cooperation. But it got, you know, it had to get to a pretty gross point for that.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, unfortunately, I rent, so I have to keep my property manager happy as well.
Yes. Well, that's something to put into the equation for sure. You know, we all operate under different circumstances, and being honest with our kids about that sort of thing is really relevant to the whole problem-solving thing. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'll see how I go this week with the with speaking from the heart, and
Good.
then
Okay.
see whether I'm hanging on by my fingernails for next week, because we've got an inspection coming up. So.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
Quick, tell me that problem solved.
The timing's interesting then. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay. Cool. Oh, well, you can always read ahead a little bit into the problem solving and see if that helps.
Yeah. Possibility.
So, Mel, did you want to talk about the other issue now?
Yeah, if you're good to go ahead with that.
Yeah, sure.
So I started doing the work on it, and I sort of worked through the questions and stuff, and then I was struggling a bit with the turnarounds.
So do you want to just quickly fill in the others about what you were working on?
So
and we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you, actually.
Oh.
I am.
Is it me or?
Yeah. Have you got
have I
okay.
done something to my...
that's better. That's better.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, so I had an incident last week in which my daughter stole some money in money boxes from a community centre that we were at, and I was obviously very upset about it, and wanting to, she was very upset then when I sort of tackled her about it, and I was sort of, I kind of said to Freya, well, how do you use the work to sort of address, you know, behaviour that you need to stop? You know, for example, stealing. I mean, so she said, well, let's work through it. So so I started working through the questions, which was great until I got to the turnaround, and then I was struggling to sort of find the evidence for the turnaround. So
the first turnaround you found, so you were working with the thought that she shouldn't have stolen that money, is that right?
Yes, I think I just put she shouldn't steal.
She shouldn't steal, yeah. So the first turnaround you're working with was she should steal.
Oh yes, yes, okay, yes, and I was like, well, how? So what's the evidence for that, or what, you know, how do I know that that's how do I know that that's true?
Yeah.
And Freya pointed out that developmentally, you know, that's just kind of where she's at the moment, and I said yes, that's actually true.
Yeah.
Is that hello?
Hello.
This is Freya.
Hello.
You might meet her at Co-op when we go again. So yes, so then I was I didn't know whether I needed to find more evidence, or whether I needed to go to the next turnaround, which would be I shouldn't steal. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, and I guess
that's kind of like
it's a bit of an odd one, isn't it? And sometimes these turnarounds work better than other times, you know. Sometimes you think, oh, that just doesn't make any sense. But you can sort of play around with it a bit and think, well, can I find it in myself? You know, have I ever taken something from someone else, you know, that wasn't mine? Have I ever...
Well, yes.
Yeah. And have I ever taken stuff off my child?
Yes. So then I thought that
must confiscated possessions or something like that.
Yeah, yes, all of those things.
Yeah. You see, all of those things could be described as stealing, you know.
Yes.
If you look at, if you're sort of playing around with it loosely, it's sort of an invitation to see, okay, I'm, you know, judging my child for doing this. Can I find it within myself? You know, can I find that I've actually also done something like this, maybe in another context, or I might have done it to them, or I might have done it, you know, when I was a child or some other time. But if you can actually find it within yourself, it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I did that and I couldn't control it either, you know, or that happened to me, and you know, either I regret it, or I can think, well, in that instance it was just something that happened. You can even actually, once you find that, if you find it within yourself that, you know, you have stolen stuff from your child or confiscated stuff, or you've stolen other things in the past, you can actually then do the work on that. If you've got a judgment around, I shouldn't have done that, then you can actually do the work on that. Because what it sometimes points to is this shame we're carrying within ourselves, or the self-judgment about things that have happened in our past. You know, that's why I said at the beginning, you know, often because I had this pattern of self-judgment, I would then project aspects of that, you know, onto my children. So I had a judgment about, you know, getting angry, and I'd sort of repressed a lot of my anger. So then when my children got really angry at me, I was really judgmental of that. And as I took the judgment off them, I could like also take the judgment off me, because I could find it in myself how I'd been really angry at my parents, at, you know, partners I'd had, you know, and I sort of wasn't owning it. I wasn't owning that energy, that emotion within myself. And so I could do the work on that as well. Just to see, oh, okay, yeah, all right, I have issues with anger too, or I have had it sometime, or whatever. So that might be relevant to the situation. And certainly with the first turnaround, she should have done this. I mean, the other way Byron Katie talks about it is to see that when something has actually happened, to sort of come in and argue with it after the fact and to say that it shouldn't have happened is just basically causing yourself stress. Like, it's happened, so to say that it shouldn't have happened is just sort of like, she calls it arguing with reality. It happened. So if we argue with reality and say that it shouldn't have happened, then basically we're causing ourselves a pain, and it doesn't help. It doesn't help in terms of our ability to move forward, to have judgment of what's happened in the past. It's like we've been programmed to think that if we judge something, it'll somehow fix it. But it just doesn't work. You know, we judge and we judge and we judge, and it just creates a whole lot of conflict, but it doesn't usually actually fix the situation.
No, that's true, I guess I've wasted a lot of energy being upset and angry and you know, all those like bad sort of stressful feelings over something that can't be changed. So
that's right. And so if you actually can do this work and unpack some of this, it's like it leaves more space. It's not an invitation for her to go and steal again, but it's actually just leaving more space for you to see other solutions. It's opening it up, and possibly also opening up some communication between you, because if that judgment isn't there, then much more likely you're going to be able to talk about it. Like, you know, do you need, can I help you, you know, get some more money to get the things you want to get, you know?
Yeah.
You don't need to steal it. I'll help you work out how you can get the things some other way. Or, you know, have some sort of dialogue around money or around things that she wants or she'd like, or, you know, how you can plan for it over a long period of time, or, you know, all that sort of positive sort of dialogue you can have. It's sort of like there's space for that now.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yep.
Cool.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you very much. Okay, so does anybody else have any questions? Or yes, Caitlin. Oh, I can't hear you. Hang on.
How about now?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. I have questions about this chapter in as far as I've read Nonviolent Communication and watched a lot of his YouTube videos and whatnot. And I was confused because you didn't, in your book, you didn't really mention the needs.
Yeah.
You called them wants.
Yeah.
And so that actually works way better for me. But is it, because I couldn't always figure out what my needs were.
Yeah.
Is there a reason for that?
Yeah.
Or
there is
are we
a reason.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a very conscious choice because I actually found the focus on needs really unhelpful. I guess I don't really, to be honest with you, I don't really believe in needs anymore. In the sense that I think we have preferences, we have wants, we might have desires, but to say I have a need, it sort of puts it in this sort of black and white, you know, I need this, therefore I need it. You know, it's sort of a very closed off space to be. To me, if I say this is a need, it's like it's non-negotiable, or it's essential, or it's an absolute. Like a need is more absolute, whereas a want is much more open and flexible, and yeah, there's much more room for movement in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I found the focus that he had of focusing on needs and always talking about what you need, because that's the formula that he presents. I just thought, well, I don't need all these things. You know, I might want them, but I don't need them.
That's why I was wondering about it, because I definitely want a lot of different things. But then when I think about what need is it that wants them from her, then I could never identify it a lot of the time. Sorry, not never, but like, I want you to do this because I think it would be good for you. But what's my need? I don't know. I need you to, I don't know. I could never, like, I couldn't work it out. So I was just curious.
Yeah. It seems like it's an artificial sort of exercise to me. And it's also creating these sort of absolutes that don't need to be there. So that's why I just sort of abandoned that. And I don't really, I guess I've made a conscious choice with my children not to talk about needs, not to talk about, I need you to do this, or, you know, I need whatever. I mean, I might say, I need a rest, you know, or something like that. But even with that, it's not actually true. I don't need a rest. I would really, really like one. And I'm going to function much better if I have one. But I could keep going, you know, it's not an absolute.
Okay.
Yeah. So I adapted it to just take that out and just to talk about what I wanted instead.
Okay.
I thought it was more
And
honest.
it still sounds like it works.
Yeah, absolutely. It still works. I just think for me, it just feels more honest.
Yeah.
And it's much more easy to talk about. I found the formula that he presented was very clunky. It sort of sounded, I don't know, it didn't really work for me in the way he used it. But the actual the thinking behind what he did, the whole interruption of this pattern of, you know, blaming other people for everything, I found incredibly powerful. So I sort of ran with the core message and adapted the actual words. And as I said, you might have missed the bit where I was talking about it, but I basically don't use the formula anymore. I just make requests.
Yeah, I know, I heard that.
Yeah.
The other question I had was in regards to it being, it's not a demand, it's a request, but I don't stop at no. So like that was confusing to me, because it's like, if I keep going, it's like, am I just keep going until I get what I want? That feels like a demand after all. I mean,
yeah,
I don't want to be a doormat. I know what you're saying, but at the same time, like,
stop at one no.
Oh, okay.
It's not like, you know, I make a request, they say no, that's the end of the story. I mean, it's just not that black and white, you know. Again, it's not a clear-cut thing. So sometimes, as I was saying to Merle, sometimes it's a matter of reframing the request or being more clear about what I'm feeling, what I'm wanting, or being more assertive or speaking louder or whatever. You know, I don't just give up on the first no. I actually, you know, I mean, it's just an intuitive thing, I suppose, maybe
you just need more practice.
Yeah.
I don't want to coerce her into doing things just because I think that she should be doing them, you know. I just wasn't, I'm not sure like when to quit. Maybe I just need more practice. Like,
well, I think it's when it becomes really stressful and when it feels like it's escalating into conflict. That's when I would back off and try something else. But yeah, it's just a matter to sort of feel your way with it, I think. There isn't a really clear point where you can say, okay, well, I'm being assertive, but now it's demanding. And it depends on the child as well. That's the other thing, because, you know, with some children, they're really sensitive to demands. Certainly my eldest child was, and any sort of, if I was assertive about my request, he would read it as a demand and he would get really upset. So if the child is really sensitive, you know, even a gentle request could be overwhelming for them. If a child isn't sensitive, you might have to jump up and down and wave flags and, you know, it really depends on the child.
Yeah. I guess it's I'm thinking of something in particular that's been an ongoing issue for years, but it's so bad right now because I lifted all the limits, and that is with her wanting to go to bed at night, and it's like, it affects my sleep for her to stay up. So she'll say, yeah, okay, but then, you know, yeah, okay, yeah, that sounds good, I understand, you need to go to sleep, so, and I keep you awake, so we'll both go to sleep. But yeah, that that's what she says when we talk about it, and then when it comes up again, it's like the conversation is like 10 times a night every night until I like, right, that's it, you have no choice in this matter. Like, so it does become a demand because I'm exhausted, you know?
Yeah, that sounds like the sort of issue that I think would do creative
Cup of
problems
coffee,
around.
please.
Yeah, okay. And we haven't gotten to that yet.
Made repeated requests. She said, "Oh yeah, I will." You know, she's appeared to agree, but she hasn't been able to follow through. And you know, obviously, it's causing you a lot of stress. So
What?
when you go into problem solving,
Okay.
you
Next
then
chapter.
involve
Yeah.
her to a much greater
Right.
extent to try and find the solution. But, or maybe not to a greater extent. I don't know. You may have already done that, but yeah, I think there is another step you can take with that to try and open it up to other solutions, because it sounds like that's a bit stuck. You know, that's where I say when even if you're making requests or you're trying to, you know,
up in the cupboard or on the bench?
Stuck, you know, that it's not shifting. That's when I have really gone into the whole problem solving sort of framework.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe something will come up around that. That can open up some more solutions, hopefully.
Okay.
Because I certainly had to go through extensive negotiations with my kids around bedtimes. You know, it's something we had a huge, you know, ongoing problem solving sessions for over years. And so I can certainly speak from experience that we had to, you know, use every tool, you know, that we had to.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Sort that out. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we'll come back to that next week.
Yeah.
And hopefully you've got some sleep between now and then. I know how hard it is. I know it's really, really tricky, that one. Okay. Thank you for your questions and your sharing. Does anybody else have something to ask or to share? Elise, do you have something?
I've had a really good week this week.
Yep.
I think it's kind of, I don't know, just from last week's session, I did a lot of thinking and not a lot of reacting, which has been really good.
Yeah.
I think I've just unpacked a lot of my own self-judgment. And it's kind of has gone just the way that you talked about before. Like once you unpack that self-judgment, then you sort of come back into yourself a bit more and you're able to be more assertive because you feel better. I'm kind of just in that zone at the moment. There's been a few times this week where I've just caught myself in that victim mentality and gone, no, like that's not the right, you know, work through the work and realize that that's not really how it is. And have been able to ask for help when I've needed it and told the boys that I will help you, but I first need to eat my lunch and that type of thing, like, which sounds so simple to most people, but for me it's I was sort of just running on air for a long time. So it's been we've had a really, really good week. I did the work around their homeschooling. I've been reading and thinking about unschooling for a really long time, but I've never really been able to let go of the maths and English type subjects. So I did the work with that this week, and my question was basically, you know, the boys need to do schoolwork. Worked all through it, got to the turnaround, and then I was like, the boys do not need to do schoolwork, and then I need to do schoolwork, which was a bit of a light bulb moment. Like, it's not them that need it. It's me who needs them to do it. You know, and for, you know, the various reasons. But that's as far as I got, and I never really truly got to the point where I went, okay, like I'm through that. We don't need to deal with that anymore. I'm still not there. So
Yeah.
I need to do a bit more unpacking around that.
Yeah. Yes. Well, a lot of these things, so something as deeply entrenched as that, you can come back to it many times. And it might be from a slightly different angle, or you might get, a different aspect of the same issue coming up again. And you might also, over time, find more evidence for those turnarounds. So you might, for example, notice, you might notice your kids actually learning the maths organically in their everyday life, on picking up more vocabulary or exploring words, and over time you'll find that evidence, that they don't need you to teach them this if they don't want it, because they're learning it anyway.
That's it. And it's such a funny thing that, like, I know, like, I see it. They, they repeat things and you think, well, where did they get that? Like, how do they even know that? But then there's just that inbuilt, like, it must be on a piece of paper for it to be real. Just that, it's just.
Well, if it must be on a piece of paper, you can always write it down for them. And I did that lots. It's like they're just talking and I'm there writing it down, or like, okay, they're doing this mental arithmetic and I'm writing it down as some sort of proof that they've actually done it.
Yeah,
but partly it's, for my benefit, that I've got, okay, there's a record of the fact that he's just worked this out in his head.
Yeah.
And also it's a demonstration to them, you can actually write it down. You don't have to work it all in your head. You can actually write this stuff down too. Isn't this cool? So it actually served many purposes to have the conversations and for me to be taking some notes or demonstrating how it could be written down at the same time. Whether you're doing cooking or they're working out, bits of money or, whatever it is. We would be out in the garden, measuring up a garden bed or, doing any sort of little calculations, and I would race in and, write it down. And then I had, because with unschooling, I mean, a lot of their learning is conversational. It's, they're learning through just chatting with you and working this through. So to actually jot down some notes of those conversations is very reassuring, because you can go back and you think, oh gosh, we covered a lot,
We actually did. Yeah. It's been, the work has been really helpful, just because my head gets stuck in these patterns, and I didn't even know to call them a pattern before this. So my head gets stuck in these patterns, and I'm starting to really notice them and just stop for a minute and think about things a lot more than when I like this earlier this week, my dad selling the house and moving away, and like late last week I was thinking, how am I ever going to survive, and then I just thought, no, I'm not a victim. Like I can work through this, and I can get in the car and go and see them, and they're not leaving me. So it's been a really good tool for me to just step back from things. It's been great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really glad that's helping you. It sounds really positive, because once you actually see the possibilities there and how much easier life can be once you start unpacking all that stuff and noticing those patterns, it's so liberating. It really is. And it doesn't fix it all overnight, but it's like, it's the light at the end of the tunnel. It really is.
Yeah, that's it.
It's like,
I have a
it's
tool.
got to get easier.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Ready for some feedback. Was chickenpox.
So, Tawny, I'm wondering if you have any questions or comments, or anything you'd like to share.
I actually read your article yesterday in that Other Ways magazine.
Oh, yeah.
About deschooling using the work. So that might be good for Elise if you haven't read that.
Yeah.
I haven't seen
It's also on my website,
Okay.
or at least a version of it. But yeah, it was published in Other Ways, which is the Victorian home education magazine.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Did you find it helpful, Tawny?
Yeah, I was just interested. One sentence that you said really sparked something in me was I can't remember how it went now, but something along the lines of you found yourself getting defensive when someone would say something about homeschooling or unschooling because it was bringing those self-doubts up.
Yes.
And I sort of resonated with that because I have some doubts a little bit as well. Particularly, I've got a sister-in-law who's very much against homeschooling. We haven't even mentioned unschooling to her at all because she just wouldn't get it.
Don't say that unschooling word.
Yeah, and I find myself getting quite, not defensive, but a little bit, my confidence starts shaking a little bit because of her lack of confidence in it. So
yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that's something to do the work on as well, maybe.
Yeah.
And how did it help you with your parents? Because you were saying that they were very much against homeschooling.
Yes.
It wouldn't have changed their mind, but it just sort of helped your confidence.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it didn't help change their minds at all. They were strongly opposed for about 10 years. And they would tell me very often, well, at least a few times a year, I would get this big download of their opposition, their anxieties, their fears, their outrage, their, whatever about it. And they didn't know I was unschooling either. That was just homeschooling, never mind this other weird stuff, But each of those times I would notice how I would get defensive, and I would notice the particular thing, that set me off, and I would think, like, for example, I particularly remember one instance being told that I was a negligent parent, that I was doing some sort of crazy sort of experiment on their grandchildren, and how could I be so negligent? And I remember just feeling so wounded by that, this idea that I'd been negligent. And then when I actually went into it and questioned it, and I sort of pretty much went straight to the turnaround. So, like, if I thought they shouldn't call me a negligent parent, so that would have been the judgment. They shouldn't say, they shouldn't call me negligent. Well, the turnaround was they should call me negligent. And so to find within myself how I was actually being negligent, how much of a positive
Just open the can.
that was. So actually, I sort of went through, well, yeah, I've actually neglected to blame my children, and I've neglected to judge them, and I've neglected to punish them, and I've neglected to order them around, and I've neglected to, or I've been neglected to be an authoritarian parent, essentially. And as soon as I sort of saw that, yes, I have neglected to be the authoritarian parent, and I'm really happy about that. Yes, I have been negligent. I have neglected to impose all these rules and all this stuff. and to actually own that and think, yes, I'm a negligent parent. Thank you very much, you know. But I knew I hadn't neglected to care for my children, or to give them attention, or to listen to them, or to, you know, be affectionate with them, or all the things that, you know. So it was actually a process. It was actually really reaffirming for me. So I'm just going to mute you, Mel, if you don't mind. Yeah. Oh, there. So, yeah, I could use it like that to sort of find the turnaround, to find the self-doubts, but also to own, you know, some of my truth. So it sort of works both ways. You can use it to work out where you're actually doubting yourself or judging yourself, or you're not sure about how you're going. And you can also use it to go, well, actually, you know, you think I'm really weird. And yes, I am really weird, because I'm going off this beaten path and I'm going in my own direction that's true for me and my children. And if that looks weird, well, so be it. So I've actually sort of embraced that. You know, I'm the negligent, weird, crazy homeschooling mum. If that's how you want to see it, well, that's fine. I'm happy to, you know, to own the fact that I've gone way off the mainstream path, and I've done it for really good reasons. And it's sort of like the more I've actually been able to own it, I've also just seen, you know, they were just really scared. You know, they were really scared because it was so new and so different and so confronting, you know, for them. And it did feel like this weird experiment I was doing. And it was a weird experiment. It absolutely was, because I didn't know how it was going to work out. Who knows how it's ever going to work out, you know? So I just sort of came to a place of okayness within myself, having done all that work and unpacked it all. And I could actually see their judgments and their criticism and their anxieties as an opportunity then to see, is there anything here within me that I'm not completely clear about? You know, so it's like, if I react, if I get defensive, it means I'm still believing something that's causing me that stress. And I just kept unpacking, and they kept downloading all their stuff on me, and eventually it just cleared. And it's like, okay, they've given up saying any of that stuff, and I've given up being defensive, and the kids have grown up and they're fine anyway. So it's all just like a non-issue now. Occasionally they'll make some sort of jibe about it, but basically, well, it took a while. It took a long time, but, you know, they've got these, you know, an 18-year-old and 14-year-old, you know, gorgeous grandchildren who are doing all sorts of interesting things, and they're really interesting people, and they're not fitting into the box, but yeah, it's just not really an issue anymore in our family, which is nice. But it did take 10 years. Yeah. Hopefully it doesn't take that long in your situation.
So how long did it take for you to become comfortable with what you were doing? Like reaching a place where you were like, yep, I am this crazy, weird homeschooling mum, and that's okay.
It took a few years. It took quite a few years, yeah. And, I mean, I started, you know, when Jeremy was, you know, 5 years old. And I suppose really I didn't fully relax into it, like completely, until he had eventually learnt to read, which was 10 years later, you know.
No!
He didn't actually really become confident in reading until he was 15. So, because he's dyslexic, it took that long. So it wasn't really until then that I was completely fine with it, because there was still this thing hanging over me all up until then, you know, because that was the big issue with my parents. You know, our grandchildren are going to grow up illiterate. How could you let this happen? And so it really took until he actually was reading for me to finally go, okay, I'm off the hook. It's all going to be okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't really have a lot of problems in the few years before that, because I knew it was on the way. You know, I knew it was going to happen. But to be honest, I was really, really glad when it finally did happen. And I was finally like, okay, the experiment has not been a complete disaster after all. And then even with, and I think I mentioned this, maybe I didn't give the years, but even with my youngest son, who's not dyslexic, he didn't even start really to learn to read until he was 12. So that was still a thing that was hanging over us, you know, and my parents, who are academics, you know, they're highly literate people, you know, just really couldn't get their heads around the fact that they had a 2 12-year-old grandchildren who couldn't read. You know, it was just too much for them. But now they're both reading. It's all fine. It's okay, you know. So, yeah, that's the backstory. It did take a while. But there was lots of opportunities for me to actually think, well, what happens if they never learn to read? Would I be okay with this, with my choices and this process and this whole thing, if my eldest son never learns to read? And I had to be completely fine with that. You know, I think, okay, well, if that's how it's going to be, then that's okay. I wouldn't do it differently, because I'm respecting his journey and the way he wants to do things and who he is as a person, and how it, you know, there was lots of reasons why it was okay if that was how it was going to be. But also I was really glad when it didn't work out that way too. You know, because it does for some people with dyslexia never learn to read. So I had to take that on board as a possibility. But he taught himself to read. As I mentioned in that article, it was entirely his own process, and I didn't really even know when it happened. He basically, when he was 15, the reason I worked out he could read was because we were sitting down watching a movie in French, and it had subtitles, and he hadn't ever sat down and watched a movie in French, you know, a French movie with us before. And he seemed to be following everything that was going on. And I looked over and I said, Jeremy, how are you working out what's going on? Like, can you read the subtitles? And he goes, yeah, I can read it. And I'm going, what? You can read it? You know, it was moving quite quickly. And this was like this total light bulb moment for me when he was 15. It's like, oh my God, he can read. This is amazing, you know. And that was it. Before then, I really just didn't have much of an idea whether he could read or not, because, you know, he still asked me to read stuff for him, and he was just playing his games and going about his life. And I knew he could read a bit, but I didn't know he could read as well as that. So, yeah, anyway, that's a story. So does that give you some helpful sort of background there, or do you have any other questions about that, Tawny?
I think the other question I had was just with the work, do you always do the judge your neighbour worksheet first before the questioning of one belief at a time?
I generally started off with one belief at a time. I found that the easiest way for me to do it. And what I would often do is actually write down a whole lot of stuff in a journal. Like I would, you know, get stressed about something and I would write in my journal, you know, a whole list of things. And then I would actually pick something out and use the one belief at a time worksheet. Or or I'd just do it in my journal, you know, because obviously I learned the questions pretty quickly, and I would just write it in my journal, you know, one sentence at a time, and do the work on it. I did occasionally use the Judge Your Neighbour worksheet, and yeah, but it took me a while to sort of get into the rhythm of doing that. That I sort of reserved for issues that I was really, really struggling with. It's like if I was really having a hard time, that the Judge Your Neighbour worksheet just takes you so much deeper. So if I felt really, really stuck about something, that's where I would go. Otherwise, I would just keep. I mean, and I didn't really use it much on my kids at all. I kept that one for issues to do with my marriage, you know, my relationship with my husband. I did heaps of Judge Your Neighbour worksheets on that. But I would just keep a journal basically beside my bed. And when stuff came up, you know, it was sometimes in the morning or before I went to bed at night, I would just write. I would just write in the journal. So I didn't even really use the worksheets that much. But I do think they're really valuable if you're feeling really stuck around an issue. Yeah.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
I used the Judge Your Neighbour sheet quite a lot this week because I found that I couldn't really pinpoint exactly what my judgment was or what.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would be so overwhelmed in a situation that there'd be so much self-judgment going on and anxiety and just trying to control the situation, and that when I went to actually write it down, I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was that what was it?
Yeah.
And when I went to the Judge Your Neighbour sheet, it really kind of unpacked it quite a lot.
Yes.
And then it really got me to a point where I go, oh, shit, but the problem's actually not my kid. The problem is me.
Yeah.
And so I've had a rough couple of days because I found that the work has been really, confronting. I found it really touching a lot of buttons for myself, and you know, things that were frustrating me with my kid was actually something within myself, and so that's been really. But just I did the Judge Your Neighbour sheet. It just really helped me when there was so much going on to kind of figure out what is really, because it prompts you a little bit, you know, by saying, okay, that helped a little bit.
Yeah.
It helped me a lot.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of working out how it works best for you, I guess, Tawny. Just adapt it to what works for you, and the main thing is just doing it however it works for you. I mean, that's the hardest part for me, was to actually just get to the point of, all right, I have to make a commitment to this. You know, I have to actually make a commitment to myself that I will do this when issues come up. And because if you don't, you know, thinking about it doesn't really do the trick. It's actually writing it down or going through the process that does the trick. So yeah, I took a while to get to that point. And actually going through it with somebody else. So going through it with a friend who also is interested in this, or you know, talking to me, or you know, whatever works. Sometimes, as Minette says, it just gets all too overwhelming sometimes, and to have somebody else sort of guide you through it can help. But as I said, sometimes just writing it all out in my journal was what I needed to do, and it might take longer, but you get there. You know, you'll get there if you have that desire to inquire. It will happen. Oh, and she's gone. So does that answer your questions? Oh. Is that okay, Tawny? Have you? Yep. Okay. Cool. Thank you. Okay, Minette, did you want to share some of what you've experienced or ask any questions?
No, I've like I said, I've had a rough couple of days. Just I'm going to get all teary-eyed. I think the turnarounds have been quite confronting.
Yeah.
And finding the evidence for them can be hard or not so hard sometimes. And so, yeah, it's just been, I struggle with my one son's behavior quite a bit. I feel quite powerless and out of control and just powerless mostly. And it automatically puts me into like anxiety. And I find it funny because my husband's not like that at all. You know, he doesn't, none of that phases him. And I'm just like, I'm having a panic attack right now. And he's like, what are you having a panic attack about? And I'm like, just behavior. And he's like, babe, there's nothing going on. So yeah, it's been very difficult for me. But yeah, I'm working through it little by little. So I'm not having a good week at all, but that's okay. Yeah, it's just the turnarounds have just really brought up a lot of stuff, and but that's okay. I came here for that, and it has to happen. And I've put it out there that I want it, so it's got to come. And it comes teary, it's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you know, you said before, and as I've said, it does. You know, it brings up old stuff, and it brings up our stories about how we were treated as children, and it brings up our old hurts.
Yeah.
And it is sometimes like, you know, opening the Pandora's box. It's like, oh goodness, you know, there's all this stuff there that I didn't even realize was there. But it's beautiful to have it open, you know, to have it open and to have it coming up and to have that flow of feeling and emotion. It means it's releasing, as you know, it's releasing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also just found that even if I've done the work, it doesn't always, you know, it's not a quick fix. Like, it's not like, oh, okay, I've worked through the questions, poof, you know, that thought's not going to come up again, or I'm not going to have that reaction again. But I have found, like I had a moment over the weekend where he was getting quite physical with me again. And afterwards, I would have always gone into this kind of victim mode and just gone like, oh, look at her. And I didn't. I went into this compassionate mode, and I was like, just be his mom. He's having a hard time. You've had moments where you've lost all your shit and it feels horrible and you feel out of control and it's scary, and just go and tell that to him.
Yeah.
And and I just did it, and I could see there was a difference from a previous, you know, physical encounter with him.
Yes.
At the beginning of this course to this weekend, I was like, wow, that was big. That's big, me not going into all victim mode, and just having a lot of love and compassion and just wanting to hold him and say, I'm sorry you're having this hard time. And so it's not a poof, but it is happening.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's really, really awesome to notice those shifts and to notice how much better it feels
it does feel much lighter, and it feels a bit more real and a lot more normal, and what how can I say it just feels more like that's my inner being is more like that than the victim.
Absolutely. Because the victim is the pattern. It's the old pattern playing where the compassion is who you really are. You know, that's your true nature. And so the more of that comes out, it's just beautiful. It's just, it's lovely to have that. And I totally appreciate that it's not the quick fix and it takes time to unpack this. But if you can feel those shifts happening already, that is absolutely amazing. And it will just grow from now on, because you're obviously you've really gone into it with an open heart, and it's beautiful to see. Thank you. And I'm so so familiar with boys who get physical, and I know how hard it is and how confronting it can be.
It is so bad.
Yeah.
We were only girls in the house, so I never. You can bring her. It's fine. Yeah, we were physical when we frustrated each other, but yeah, this is next level.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And I think, and we never attacked my mom or anything. So this is very like, foreign grounds.
Oh yes.
Shouldn't be hitting their parents.
Yeah, I know. It's just, it really, really comes. It gets right to the core of the choices, in parenting. It's like, it brings it into stark relief. It's like, do you crack down on this, or do you open up, and see it in a new way? And yeah, I mean, I guess I only opened up and took on this whole inquiry and all this sort of stuff because it didn't seem to be any other option, that was going to work. It was like I was forced into this crisis situation, and as I described, something had to give, so it really, I had to be pushed, for me to actually start unpacking. But as I was talking to somebody else about this morning, it was like, there was this shell around me of this sort of good girl persona, the one that was trying really hard and had to do the right thing. And it was this sort of persona that was sort of limiting me, and it was like a box, that it was holding me tight. And it's like my child came at that persona and this sort of ego structure with a sledgehammer. It was just a whack, whack. I'm just going to break this. Any ideas that you have about staying in this box, in this rigid thing, are going to get smashed open by me, and I'm just going to blast through it, and it's going to feel really, really confronting. But once it started to disintegrate, this really sort of, I've got to get it right, good girl sort of thinking, the patterns that went along with that, once they started to fall away, there was so much more freedom in my life. I could actually really start to, express more of what was really real, what was authentic for me, rather than this person to be. Hello.
Hey.
So I guess I'm just saying, it's, hello, darling. It's really, really worth it. As I'm sure you already know.
Yeah, I think that's what my second boy does that, and he's really just he doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
And he's really pushing me to go, listen, you've got to let go of what you thought it's going to be, because it's not that.
Yeah.
And the quicker you do it, the better this will go. Because he doesn't give. Like nothing phases him.
Yeah.
And I'm always trying to keep, up appearances, and he's just like, I'm just going to show you it's not going to happen today, Mum.
Yeah.
We're not going to be a good family.
Yes.
I'm going to have something happen.
Yeah.
So yeah. I know he's here for a reason in this family, and he's there to push my buttons. It's just really hurting, but it's okay. We'll get there.
It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like, I've had to actually be really honest with people that it just looks really messy sometimes, you know?
It is.
Really messy. It's like you take the controls away, and sometimes it's just really messy. And that's just how it is, but it's like, you take the cap off a bottle of fizzy drink that's been shaken up. It's sort of like it goes for a while, and it does look really messy, and it seems like completely out of control. But after a period of time, that energy, starts to settle down and settle and dissipate, and things really shift. But initially, it can feel like, whoa, this is just way more than I bargained for. But it's got to come out. That's the thing. You can't keep this on that. And if you, I guess, in the experience of my extended family, you know, the keeping, they were always, you know, they're of British heritage, and you had to keep the lid on everything, you know, really tight. And it came out in alcoholism, and it came out in, you know.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. The energy will come out. It has to come out. It will just come out in unhealthy ways. And
so it came out in, you know, all sorts of violence and alcoholism and dysfunctional relationships and you know, people repressing their sexuality and then going all weird, and you know, it just came out in all sorts of crazy ways. But it was always covered over by this pretense of no, we're a nice middle class family, you know, it's all fine here. You know, that pretense that we've probably all grown up with, that everything's fine, we're nice, it's all good, you know, and then behind the scenes all shit, you know, is hitting the fan. So yeah, that just wasn't going to happen, you know, with my kids. It's sort of like there was no hope of the pretense getting off the ground. So I couldn't hang on to that, you know, that good girl sort of image. It just wasn't going to hold because my kids weren't cooperating. They weren't coming to the party. So anyway,
sometimes
it's all fine. It's all good. But I do understand that the process can be messy, and it can look really messy for a while. So yeah, I guess I should have warned you about that at the beginning, but oh well. Never mind. You're still here, so I guess you're okay. So anything else? Okay, awesome. Does anybody else have anything else they want to share?
No, I was just going to say to Minette, don't worry, you're not the only one. We sometimes joke that sometimes our friends just want to be our friends because our kids make their kids look cool.
Absolutely.
Don't worry.
That is actually a really positive thing to focus on. It's sort of like, if you make everybody look better, you're gonna make people feel good about themselves.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. It's like, I'm the one over here struggling. It's like, okay. Yeah, I've had a few friends that have felt very good about themselves in reference to my family.
We take all the pressure off.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, folks. Well, thank you so much for showing up tonight and sharing your beautiful selves, and even sharing glimpses of your beautiful children. And I will look forward to seeing you next week. And yes, feel free to ask any questions or raise anything in the group or with me by message if it comes up in the meantime. And also, I don't know whether you all saw, but I did post something to say that what comes along with the course is an offer for any of you to have a one-on-one session with me, you know, at half price, either during the course or after the course or in 3 months' time or whenever. The offer doesn't expire, but if you want to go deeper, in addition to just, you know, talking to me here and in the Facebook group and by Messenger, if you want to actually have like a full-on, you know, in-depth session, then that offer is there too. So anyway, I will see you next week. So bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.